In the corrupt city of Ashford, rookie cop Jessica Harris uncovers a web of lies that could destroy her career and her life. Will she expose the truth or become its victim? The city of Ashford was a place that carried a heavy air, one thick with secrets, whispered rumors, and distrust. Beneath the gleaming glass of the police precinct, a much darker undercurrent flowed, and the badge was no longer a symbol of justice, but a tool used to crush the very people it was meant to protect. The officers here weren't just following orders. They were part of a hidden network that had mastered the art of destruction. For years, they had perfected the method of manipulating the law, twisting the truth, and leaving innocent lives shattered in their wake. It had become a game, and the rookies were the newest players to be taught the rules. One such rookie was Officer Jessica Harris. At 25, she was eager, ambitious, and hungry for respect. She had joined the Ashford Police Department straight out of the academy, believing that wearing the uniform would mean something noble, something honorable. The world had told her that wearing the badge was a privilege, and she believed it wholeheartedly. But Ashford streets were not like the ones she had trained for. They were rougher, darker, and the men and women who had worn the uniform far longer than she had were not there to guide her. They were there to shape her. Jessica's first solo patrol started like any other. She pressed her uniform, checked her gear, and drove toward the familiar streets, the hum of her patrol car filling the silence. But it didn't take long for her to feel the weight of her decisions. She had been taught to see threats where others saw none, to make quick judgments, to escalate first and ask questions later. In the back of her mind, she could hear the old words from Sergeant Williams, who had taken her under his wing. In this city, you don't wait for trouble to come to you. You go and find it. And find it she did. A man, standing alone on the corner, checking his phone. His name was Michael Simmons. And to Jessica, he was just another statistic. Another possible suspect. Another target. What she didn't know was that this one arrest, this one moment, would unravel everything she thought she knew about the badge, about her role, and about the city she had sworn to protect. It would set in motion a chain of events that would shake Ashford to its core, exposing the rot that had festered within the precinct for years. And Jessica would soon learn that the very people she had trusted had led her into a trap she could not escape. Jessica had been on the force for only 6 months, but she was already learning that Ashford wasn't a place for idealism. As she pulled into the precinct parking lot, the sun barely touched the horizon, casting long shadows over the building. Her heart beat faster than usual, her mind racing with thoughts of proving herself. She was finally going to patrol solo. No more shadowing, no more second-guessing her decisions. Today was the day she would show the other officers she wasn't just another rookie. Her car's engine hummed to a stop, and she stepped out, adjusting the weight of her gear belt, running her hand over the crisp lines of her uniform. The precinct was already buzzing with activity, officers filing in for their morning briefing. Jessica walked through the entrance with purpose, her eyes scanning the familiar faces of her colleagues. "Hey, Harris," called Sergeant Todd Daniels, his voice gruff but not unkind. He was a seasoned officer, nearing his 50th birthday, his face worn by years of hard work on these unforgiving streets. He approached her, his steps slow, measured. "Got a second before you head out?" Jessica nodded, her smile unwavering. "Of course, Sarge," she replied, voice smooth, but there was a slight tremor beneath it. Deep down, she knew that this wasn't going to be an easy ride. Todd motioned for her to follow him to a quiet corner. "I know you're excited to get out there, but remember, this city's different from what you trained for. It's tougher. The streets have their own rhythm, their own rules." Jessica fought the urge to roll her eyes. "I can handle it, Sarge." "I'm ready," she said, cutting him off, her words firm but tinged with an edge of defensiveness. Todd studied her for a moment, his weathered eyes narrowing. "You may think you're ready, but it's not about handling it. It's about understanding the people, the neighborhoods. Learn to see more than just what's in front of you, Harris." Jessica's smile tightened. She was ready, more than ready. And nothing, not even Sergeant Daniels, was going to slow her down. But as she turned to leave, the dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio, cutting through the air like a sharp knife. "Unit 24, respond to a possible suspicious individual near Eastwood Convenience. Mayo, about 6 feet, casual attire. Suspicious activity reported. Jessica's hand immediately gripped the radio. Unit 24 on my way, she replied, her pulse quickening as she jumped into a patrol car. The streets of Ashford were about to become her proving ground. But what she didn't realize was that the moment she arrived, everything would change. The man she was about to arrest wasn't just another suspicious individual. He was the beginning of the end of everything she thought she knew about justice. And she was about to make a decision that would haunt her forever. Jessica didn't think much of the call when she first pulled into the Eastwood convenience parking lot. The man, Michael Simmons, looked ordinary enough, standing outside, casually scrolling through his phone. He seemed harmless, just another guy waiting for his coffee or a late-night snack. But to Jessica, the call had already been made. The dispatcher had mentioned suspicious activity, and in her world, that was all the reason she needed. She flipped on her siren, the high-pitched wail cutting through the cool evening air. Michael didn't even flinch as she pulled up. His expression didn't change, and for a moment, Jessica thought maybe he hadn't noticed her, but then he glanced up, his face a mix of confusion and mild annoyance. Jessica felt a small surge of pride. Just another day on the job, she thought. She hopped out of the car with practiced confidence, her boots clicking against the pavement as she approached him. "Hey," she called, her tone sharper than she intended. "You've been standing here for a while. What's going on?" Michael gave a half-smile, shaking his head. "I'm just waiting for a friend, officer." Jessica wasn't buying it. She had been trained to see the worst in people, to suspect the worst. She crossed her arms, looking down at him, feeling a little thrill run through her. "Mind if I see some ID?" Michael raised an eyebrow. "Seriously? I'm just waiting for someone." She didn't back down. "It's just routine." The moment stretched, and Jessica felt the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders. She could let him go, but no, she was supposed to uphold the law. The badge felt heavy on her chest as she reached for her handcuffs. Michael's eyes flickered with something. Anger, maybe frustration, and for a split second, she felt a pang of doubt. Was she making the right call? But just as she was about to snap the cuffs around his wrists, a familiar voice crackled over her radio. "Unit 24, stand by for confirmation." The initial call came from a payphone. The words hit her like a slap. A payphone? Jessica froze. That was odd. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She glanced back at Michael, who now had a look of quiet resignation. Was he telling the truth? Jessica hesitated. The streets of Ashford had taught her to trust her instincts, but right now, her instincts were telling her she was on the wrong path. But it was too late to turn back now, wasn't it? She had already made the call. And in her mind, once she'd made a decision, it was final, right? Michael stood there, his eyes steady. "I'm not resisting, officer," he said softly, almost like he was trying to reason with her. But Jessica wasn't listening. Not yet. This was how it started, the moment of truth. And as the radio crackled again, she realized her world was about to be shaken in ways she hadn't anticipated. But she had no idea just how deep the rabbit hole went. By the time Jessica arrived at the courthouse the next morning, she was already feeling the pressure building in her chest. The weight of what had happened the day before. Her quick arrest of Michael Simmons lingered like an anchor she couldn't shake off. She had expected things to go according to plan. After all, she'd done her job. She was just following the procedure. But now, as she walked into the courtroom, she could feel the stares of her colleagues, the quiet whispers floating around her, and it made her skin crawl. The court was packed. Journalists, the defense attorney's team, and even a few officers from the department were seated in the gallery, their eyes following her every move. It felt like a spotlight had been placed on her. No longer just a rookie officer, but the center of attention, and not for the reason she'd ever imagined. "Jessica Harris," called Judge Carter, his voice firm and commanding as he looked up from his papers. His reputation preceded him. He was the one everyone feared, the judge who had a reputation for exposing corruption in the police force. Jessica felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. His cold gaze felt like it could pierce right through her. She stepped forward, her legs stiff as she stood before him, her heart hammering in her chest. Judge Carter didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We've reviewed the evidence in the case against Michael Simmons," he began. "And based on the video footage, it seems there are significant discrepancies in your report, Officer Harris." Jessica's stomach twisted. The video footage? She had thought the whole thing would be swept under the rug, that it was just a routine arrest. But now, the damning evidence was being laid out in front of her. "Your actions don't seem to align with the procedures taught at the academy," Judge Carter continued, his voice calm but cutting. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Jessica's mind raced, scrambling for words, but all she could think about was how she had been so sure of herself the day before, how she convinced herself that she was in the right, and now the reality of her mistake was crashing down on her. Before she could respond, her defense attorney, a tall, middle-aged man named Greg Turner, stood up and interrupted. "Your Honor, we ask for leniency. Officer Harris has had a clean record up until now and was simply following orders. She is still learning the ropes." But the judge wasn't having it. "Orders don't excuse misconduct, Mr. Turner. I'm not here to protect her career. I'm here to uphold the law. This court will investigate every detail of this case. And Officer Harris, you're going to have to explain exactly what happened." Jessica's throat tightened. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she had been just doing her job. But the weight of Judge Carter's gaze made it feel like there was no escaping this mess. The moment she thought she had everything under control, her carefully constructed world was crumbling in front of her. And she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. Jessica sat stiffly in the witness stand, feeling the weight of her uniform pressed down on her chest like a vice. Her mind raced as the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Every eye in the room was on her, from the journalists scribbling down every word, to the defense attorneys who looked at her with pity and suspicion. Even the judge, Marcus Carter, a man known for his relentless pursuit of truth, was watching her closely, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she kept her gaze straight ahead, refusing to show how much the pressure was affecting her. She had been trained for moments like this, confronting criminals, questioning suspects, standing tall in the face of danger. But this wasn't the same. She wasn't standing against a criminal. She was standing against her own mistakes, the very foundation of her career, and her belief in the system she had sworn to uphold. Judge Carter's voice sliced through the tension in the room. "Officer Harris, you've seen the evidence. Multiple angles of video footage clearly show that Michael Simmons was fully compliant during your interaction. And yet, you escalated the situation. You arrested him without cause, and you falsified your report." Jessica swallowed hard. The words stung, but they were true. She had seen the footage herself in the days leading up to the trial, and she couldn't deny what it showed. She had misinterpreted the situation. She had let her training, her ambition, her need to prove herself get in the way of her better judgment. I didn't mean for it to go like that, Your Honor," Jessica started, her voice shaky. "I thought I was doing my job. I thought he was a threat." Judge Carter's gaze was unrelenting. "But was he?" he asked, his tone sharp. Jessica hesitated. "Was he? No, he wasn't. Michael Simmons hadn't posed a threat. He had been harmless, just another man going about his day. And in her rush to follow procedure, she had made a grave error." As the courtroom fell into a heavy silence, Jessica could feel the eyes of her fellow officers on her. Some were judgmental, others filled with disappointment. A few, she could tell, were nervous, guilty even. They knew she wasn't the only one who had made mistakes. I may have misinterpreted the situation, Your Honor," she whispered, barely loud enough for the court to hear. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "I didn't mean to lie in my report. I thought I was doing what was right." Judge Carter leaned forward slightly, his piercing gaze never leaving her. "You were trained to follow the law, Officer Harris, not to create your own version of it. And right now, the law is telling me that you must answer for your actions. We will be investigating your conduct further." Jessica's heart sank. She had expected consequences, but not this. She had crossed a line, and now she had to face it. Outside the courtroom, in the quiet hallway, her defense attorney, Greg Turner, leaned against the wall, rubbing his temples. The weight of the case was starting to get to him, too. But Jessica could feel the truth of it all settling into her bones. No matter what happened, her career, her future, was now inextricably tied to the unraveling of the very system she had once believed in. The game had changed, and she had no idea where it would take her next. The days that followed felt like a relentless storm cloud hanging over Jessica's head. She couldn't escape the whispers in the precinct. Everywhere she went, she could feel the weight of the looks, the lingering glances, the hushed conversations that stopped the moment she entered a room. It was like her mistake had become public property, and she was now the subject of the town's gossip. Even Sergeant Todd Daniels, the man who had always been her mentor, barely looked her in the eye. The video evidence had shattered everything she had built. It had gone viral. Citizens, activists, even other officers had seen it. People were angry and the pressure was mounting. And all Jessica could do was watch as her career spiraled out of control. One evening, as she sat in her cramped apartment, the weight of the case pressing on her chest like an iron fist, her phone buzzed. It was an alert from her news app. Ashford Police officer under investigation for misconduct. She clicked on it without thinking. The headline was everywhere. The video had gone viral, and now people were demanding answers. Social media had exploded with both outrage and sympathy. Some people rallied behind her, claiming that the system had failed her, that she was just a pawn in a corrupt game. Others wanted her fired, banned from ever wearing a badge again. The whole city seemed to have an opinion, and Jessica couldn't escape it. As if that weren't enough, she received another call that made her blood run cold. It was from an anonymous number. "Officer Harris," the voice on the other end said, "you're not the only one. You're just the one who got caught." Jessica's stomach twisted. She didn't know what to make of the cryptic words. But as the voice continued, she realized that this was bigger than her. Much bigger. There's a network, Harris. A whole system of corruption. They train rookies like you. Make you see threats where there are none. You were just unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The words echoed in her mind, and for the first time since the trial started, Jessica felt a deep pang of something she hadn't expected. Fear. Fear that she had become part of something much darker than she could have ever imagined. With a deep breath, she slammed her phone down, the weight of the reality settling over her like a thick fog. The system had taught her to see things through a certain lens. But now, as the truth came into focus, she wasn't sure what to believe anymore. The line between right and wrong was blurring, and she was right in the middle of it. The investigation into Jessica's actions had only just begun, but it was already spiraling far beyond her control. As days passed, the courtroom buzzed with the mounting tension, and new revelations began to surface, threatening to unravel everything Jessica had ever known about the department and herself. The phone call had shaken her to the core, but what came next hit even harder. It was another rainy Thursday when Jessica received an unexpected visitor at her apartment. The knock on her door was quiet at first, almost tentative, like whoever stood behind it wasn't sure they should be there. But Jessica, still reeling from the last few weeks, opened the door, half expecting it to be one of her colleagues, another reporter, or perhaps some well-meaning activist who wanted to help her. Instead, it was a man she barely recognized, Captain Ray Lawson. He was tall, his face stern, like someone who'd seen too much of the world and not in a good way. His uniform, though slightly wrinkled, still carried the weight of authority. "Jessica," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. His voice was low, almost too calm for the situation. "We need to talk." She closed the door behind him, her heart pounding in her chest. "Talk? About what?" He glanced around, scanning the sparse apartment like he was assessing something. His eyes finally settled on her. "I think you figured out by now. About the network. The corruption within the department." Jessica's breath caught. She had been wondering if the cryptic call had been some kind of sick joke, but Captain Lawson's words confirmed her worst fears. The shadow that had been looming over her career for the past few weeks was real. The conspiracy was far bigger than her. "I didn't have a choice," Lawson continued, his voice edged with something close to regret. "None of US did. They've been running this operation for years. It's It's how things work around here. Rookies like you, they train us to see threats everywhere, even when there are none. They make us think we're doing the right thing, when we're actually just part of the system that's breaking the law. Jessica's mind reeled. She wasn't just a victim of a few bad decisions. She had been part of something much darker than she could have ever imagined. She thought back to her first days on the force, when she had been so eager to prove herself. Now that ambition seemed naive. She had been a cog in a machine that chewed up anyone who stood in its way. I don't know what to do, Jessica muttered, the weight of everything crashing down on her. I'm just trying to survive. I never thought. Survival's not the issue anymore, Lawson interrupted, his eyes dark with an unspoken truth. The issue now is what you're going to do with the truth you know. You can't undo what's been done, but you can make sure it doesn't keep happening. As he turned to leave, Jessica stood frozen, the storm inside her only getting worse. She realized that the game she thought she had been playing was never hers to win. Now, it wasn't just about saving her career. It was about bringing down a system that had been corrupt for far too long. The truth, however ugly, was now her responsibility. The days after Captain Lawson's visit were a blur for Jessica. She couldn't shake the weight of his words. The network, the corruption, the lies. It felt like the very ground beneath her had cracked open, and now she was standing on the edge, looking down into a pit she didn't even know existed. But as much as she wanted to retreat into the shadows and pretend she didn't hear anything, her conscience wouldn't let her. The truth was like a fire in her veins, burning through her every thought. On her next shift, she couldn't focus. The streets of Ashford, once familiar and routine, now felt foreign, dangerous. Every interaction with a civilian, every radio call, every whispered conversation between officers seemed like a code she couldn't crack. Her mind raced, replay her first day on the job when everything had seemed so simple, so clean. She had wanted to be a hero. Now she was just a part of the system that needed to be dismantled. Her phone buzzed late one night as she sat at the kitchen table, the weight of the case pressing on her shoulders like 1,000 pounds. It was a text from Greg Turner, her defense attorney. "We need to talk. It's about the footage." Jessica's pulse quickened. She had been avoiding him, not wanting to face the reality of the mess she was in. But now, there was no escaping it. She texted back, "Where?" 10 minutes later, she was standing outside a dimly lit cafe on the edge of town, its neon sign flickering weakly in the rain. She saw Greg through the window, his face tired but determined, his hands folded in front of him like he was preparing for something big. As she walked in, she could feel the weight of conversation already hanging in the air. "Jessica," Greg greeted her with a nod, "we've got a serious problem." She slid into the seat across from him, heart pounding. "What do you mean?" Greg's expression was grim. "The footage, it's been tampered with. Someone's been editing the files. It wasn't just a wrong call that led to your arrest. Someone's been manipulating evidence for a long time, and we've traced it back to your precinct." Jessica felt her stomach churn. She had always known something wasn't right, but this was a whole new level of betrayal. "So, I wasn't just a part of the system," she said quietly. "I was a pawn." Greg leaned forward, his voice low. "Exactly. And it's bigger than just you, Jessica. There's a network that goes back years. Officers, higher-ups, everyone's involved. The only way to stop it is to expose it." Jessica's hands trembled as she reached for her cup, the weight of the moment settling heavily on her shoulders. This was it. There was no turning back now. She looked up at Greg, her voice steady but filled with a resolve she hadn't known she had. "Then let's do it. Let's bring them down." The decision to take action was one of the hardest Jessica had ever made. It was easy to believe she was fighting for something noble, justice, fairness, accountability. But as she sat alone in her car, parked across from the police precinct, a heavy doubt crept over her. What if exposing the truth wasn't the right thing to do? What if she was only making things worse? The storm clouds that had been hanging over Ashford for weeks now felt like a reflection of the storm brewing in her own mind. She had spent the past few days gathering evidence, documents, recordings, anything she could get her hands on. She and Greg had been working late into the night, piecing together a web of corruption that reached all the way to the top. But now, as the rain tapped against her windshield and the lights of the precinct flickered in the distance, Jessica couldn't shake the fear that as she went through with this, she would be condemning herself as much as the people she was trying to expose. She had become part of the very system she had once sworn to fight against. She had used her badge to harm someone, and now she was about to bring down the whole house of cards. In that moment, Jessica realized something important. It wasn't just about exposing the corruption or protecting her career. It was about something much deeper. It was about who she wanted to be. Deep down, the truth had already taken root inside her, and no matter how much she tried to suppress it, it was never going to let her go. The lesson she learned was that sometimes you can't just fix what you've broken. Sometimes you have to rebuild it from the ground up, even if that means losing everything you worked for. Sometimes it's about doing what's right, not what's easy. With a deep breath, she put the car in gear. She wasn't going to let fear hold her back. She couldn't change the past, but she could change what happened next. It wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about showing the world that there was still good in the system, if only they were brave enough to fight for it. As she pulled out of the parking lot, the rain seemed to let up, as if the world was holding its breath for what would come next. And for the first time in weeks, Jessica felt like she had a purpose again. She was ready to face whatever came her way, no matter how hard it would be. The days that followed were a blur of hearings, accusations, and mounting pressure. Jessica had done it. She had taken the first step toward exposing corruption that had plagued Ashford for years. But as the case against her grew, so did the weight of her choices. The evidence was in, the testimonies had begun, and the courtroom was packed. It was no longer just about her. It was about the city, the broken system, and every officer who had ever felt the burden of a badge that no longer stood for justice. As Jessica sat in the witness chair, the courtroom felt suffocating. The stares from the gallery, the weight of Judge Carter's gaze, everything seemed to close in on her. She was no longer the confident rookie she had once been. Now, she was an accused officer, standing in front of a judge who had made a career of exposing corruption, a judge who could make or break her future with a single word. And the thought of it made her stomach churn. But it wasn't just her career at stake anymore. It was about exposing the truth, about holding the system accountable for its actions. She had seen firsthand how the system manipulated young officers, how it twisted the very notion of justice. She had been a part of it, but now she was determined to make it right, to help rebuild something that had been broken for so long. As her defense attorney presented the case, Jessica sat in silence, listening to the words that felt like they were meant for someone else. She had once believed in the badge, in the promise of justice, but now she knew that justice didn't come easily. It had to be fought for, even when the fight seemed impossible. At one point, Judge Carter asked her a simple question, but it struck her like a hammer. "What do you stand for, Officer Harris?" The question hung in the air, and for the first time, Jessica didn't answer immediately. She thought about everything she had learned, everything she had lost, and everything she had the chance to rebuild. "I stand for what's right," she finally said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her, even if it means losing everything. It was a painful truth, but one she had come to accept. The lesson she had learned in the hardest way possible was this. Sometimes, doing what's right means standing alone. It means facing the consequences of your actions, no matter how much they hurt. And in the end, it's about doing the work to make things better, even when you don't know how it will turn out. For the first time in a long while, Jessica felt like she was finally on the right path.